UN's big report on climate change, IPCC's report on climate mitigation, is out. And if you've been confused and if you've been wondering, what is this report about? What are the big takeaways from this report? And what does it really mean for India and globally? Today we have with us Dr. Navroz Dubash, who is one of the authors of the report and who's also a professor at the Center for Policy Research. We will ask him all of these questions and more. So, Dr. Dubash, for an enthusiastic reader who's interested in climate science, there's so many IPCC reports, the sixth assessment, and this is the third working group, the second report. So why is this report important and how is it different from the previous ones?
Okay. Well, first of all, this report is about mitigation. So it's the solutions. The two reports that preceded it are on science and impacts. And as your readers may or may not know, these reports occur or are produced on a sort of 5 to 6 yearly cycle. So they're updates of the science as it exists around the physical science, the impacts, and mitigation or the solutions every 6 years or so. So this report is particularly important because I think prior reports have told us that we're really running out of time, that emissions are still growing. And so the question is, what do we do about it? And this is the report that tries to answer that question.
Correct. So, the report also says that we're on track for a 3 degrees Celsius world by 2100. So what would that mean for us here in India, for our seas, mountains, heat waves, cold waves, rains, agriculture, basically everything?
Yeah. Well, actually, the report says, so these are all ranges, right? So the report actually says, if I remember right, 2.2 to 3 point something degrees is the range. And this report doesn't get into what it means for India, but the previous report did get into that. And what we're essentially seeing, I'm afraid I don't have those details at my fingertips, but essentially what we're seeing is the potential for more violent weather events. We're seeing the potential for sea level rise. We are seeing decreased crop yields and so on. So essentially what we are seeing is that the effects of climate change are such that they're going to make sustainable development more challenging.
Right. Also, what are the major findings of the report that are relevant to India's mitigation journey?
Yeah. So a report like the IPCC is a global assessment. It's not meant to be prescriptive for any given country. And so really it is, it doesn't say what any particular country should or should not do as a result, but it provides sort of broad trends. And the kinds of things that are important for all countries, but perhaps particularly for developing countries, well, actually for all countries, are that there are some growing opportunities. We've seen the price of renewable energy, for example, fall 85% when it comes to solar panels and battery technology. Since 2010, wind has fallen 55%. It also says that there are opportunities, quite a lot of opportunities to reduce emissions. So about 25%, we could reduce about 25% of emissions by 2030 from today's levels at a cost of under $20 a ton of carbon, and in some cases with net benefits, and another 25% at under $100 a ton, which is a much higher number. It also says that countries that are growing their emissions, like India, because we're starting with a low level, many people don't have access to commercial energy or use very little of it. Since we're building our infrastructure, we have an opportunity to try and lock in low carbon infrastructure rather than high carbon infrastructure, which means the kinds of power plants, instead of coal power plants, we could consider building more renewables. Instead of building cities based around private automobiles for transportation, we could build cities that are based on walking, bike paths, public transport, and so on. We could think about our freight systems to be more energy efficient. We could think about our buildings, which have 30, 50, 60 years lifespans, to be much more, to be able to be designed to be cooled without so much air conditioning, right? Those are all the kinds of things that we could think about doing.
Right. The report also sort of establishes how, there's enough capital in the world for this green transition. And it also emphasizes how the developed countries need to sort of lend financial support to developing countries. And for India, we already have very ambitious targets leading to a net zero target by 2070. So how do you look at that?
Well, I think the the report says that overall, financial flows are a factor of 3 to a factor of 6 less than what is necessary to reach 1.5 or between 1.5 and 2 degrees Celsius by 2030. And not to reach it by 2030, but the financial flows required by 2030 to be on track for those kinds of limits. And that is a global average number. Actually, in particular regions, in particularly in developing regions, it tends to be higher than that. So we are well short of finances. And it's one of the things that definitely we need to be thinking about. At the same time, there are other factors that interact that we should be thinking about. We should be thinking about building institutions that are capable of steering this kind of transition towards a low carbon future. We should be thinking about how we make sure that the poor and the vulnerable don't get left behind in these transitions. Those who are kind of locked into, say, a fossil fuel economy, as countries shift away from fossil fuels, what happens to those workers? We need to be thinking about how we design policies, and increasingly the IPCC talks about not individual policies, but packages of policies that reinforce each other to take care of distributional concerns, to try and stimulate innovation, and so on, right? So in the past, when you talk about climate policies, people would talk about a carbon tax or what is called a cap and trade system, where you set a cap on emissions, you allocate the permits, and then you can trade those permits across different entities. Now, increasingly, people are saying, look, we need to think about packages of policies to bring about transitions. If you want to make your cities more low carbon in the future, you not only have to support electric vehicles, but you also have to support buses, design your cities differently, create walking and biking pathways, and so on and so forth, right? So as well as do behavioral change of citizens and so on. So the conversation has got much more complicated, and this report, I think, deals with a lot more of these complexities.
Right.
One final point, if I may. These are all complicated things to think about and decide. What the report also says is most countries in the world are not yet at the stage where they have domestic governance institutions that are in a position to decide these things adequately. We don't have the knowledge institutions. We don't have the coordination institutions. We tend to hive off decisions to environment ministries. And these are decisions that are much bigger than environment ministries. If you don't create those governance structures, right, it's very hard to make these decisions sensibly. You know you're going to leave some communities behind with these disruptions. Coal communities over time may get left behind. There may be workers in other sectors. If you're moving your industrial emissions, certain technologies are going to win, certain technologies are going to lose. How do you decide how to make sure that you bring your whole population along? Because nobody wants to see carbon transition and the burdens of that being placed on the back of the vulnerable, right? So the state and governments have a lot more thinking and organizing to do, to coordinate across sectors, to bring people together in deliberative processes, and to do the kind of knowledge gathering and strategy setting. And without more explicit effort at that, it's going to be a very hard problem to solve. So that's another theme in this report.
Correct. Absolutely. Thank you so much.